Good evening, and welcome to another evening of ancient Greek and its history. Tonight we have a departure. Instead of a recitation and an arcane lesson in Greek metrics, we will visit the famous Venetus A, the earliest manuscript we have of Homer. And here is the history of it, written by our director, producer, auteur, and cinematographer, J.C. McCall. So you'll have to excuse me if I read it. A man named Homer composed all 28,000 lines of the two poems that we call the Iliad and the Odyssey. Or so it was believed at one time, but it's extremely unlikely that any one person composed all or even a large part of the poems. What is more likely is that they were composed in parts and gradually stitched together over many years by professional reciters called rhapsodes. And indeed, the word rhapsode comes from the Greek word meaning to stitch together. For hundreds of years in pre-literate Greece, the poems existed only in the memories of those rhapsodes. Then someone created symbols to represent the sounds of the Greek language, symbols that we now call the ancient Greek alphabet. The rhapsodes' poems were transcribed with those symbols. In other words, the oral poems became written poems. After the poems became written poems, they were subject to obsessive editing. Scholars from ancient Athens to the present pored over every line of the poems and added their comments. For many centuries, those comments were written in the margins of the poems and were called scholia. Those marginal comments, or scholia, are very important because they preserve for us the wisdom of scholars from many years ago. The earliest scholia have not survived. What we usually have instead is a manuscript of the poems that was copied in the Middle Ages from an earlier, now lost manuscript, which had in turn been copied from an earlier manuscript, and so on. For example, in the 10th century AD, some monks took a 1st century AD manuscript of the poems and copied it in full, including the scholia that were written in the margins of that 1st century manuscript. Those scholia in the 1st century manuscript included scholia copied from the margins of a 2nd century BC manuscript. The 2nd century BC manuscript and the 1st century AD manuscript are forever lost. But in the 10th century manuscript, we have a record of what the 2nd century BC editor thought, an incomplete and imperfect record, but a record. Because the scholia in that 10th century manuscript give us a glimpse of what editors thought of the Homeric poems more than 2,000 years ago, the 10th century manuscript is very valuable. It is called Venetus A. And because it is stored in the Martian Library in Venice, Venetus is the Latin word for Venetian. The late Homeric scholar Geoffrey Kirk called Venetus A the greatest of all medieval Greek manuscripts. Of course, the Library of St. Mark's does not let anyone in to see the manuscript except specially credentialed scholars. But I did see Venetus A, and this is the story of how I did it. Actually, the main reason some people go to Venice is to see Venetus A, because of its unique position as the earliest manuscript of the Iliad dating from the 10th century. The earliest written Iliad known in the world. My Greek classmate insisted that I gaze on it, and knowing that it wouldn't be easy to get access, I fortified myself before going with a credentialed letter from the head of the classics department at Loyola in New Orleans, attesting to, with some exaggeration, to my scholarly credentials and my bona fides and my good intentions to study the Venetus A, at least to gaze upon it. So I made my way armed with that letter from the head of the classics department, I made my way to the Biblioteca Marciana, and here you will see a picture of it. And there, when I got in, I encountered a rather elaborate ritual. The first thing you do is present your accreditation. And that is, I handed in the letter from the professor at Loyola. And that doesn't get you anywhere. Instead, a messenger takes it inside, because you are not admitted to the Holy of Holies at all. You sit in an anteroom. A messenger took it inside, and an English-speaking girl came out and sent me to a seated official who demanded my passport. Well, I don't carry my passport when traveling, but she said she would take my driver's license. So she took my driver's license, and then she typed a lot on her computer. She typed a lot more than was on my driver's license. So I have no idea what she was typing because I couldn't look over her shoulder. And she went on and on with her computer, and then after she had finished with that, she took my picture with the kind of device you see in a driver's license bureau. And she then, after typing even more, she then put it through a machine, and she issued me what's called a codice utente, a very impressive plastic card with my picture. Here you will see a picture of my codice utente, and please regard it respectfully. Then, after I had that card, another official escorted me to a reading room. My wife was not admitted because she doesn't have a codice utente, so she had to wait outside. There I sat at a table and waited while I refreshed my memory with the Iliad from my touch that I'd carried with me to get in the mood. And after a while, they make you wait a long time, I think, to build up the excitement and apprehension of the sacred moment. After a while, an attendant entered carrying not any book, but two thick red cloths, just two thick red cloths, and she reverently places them on the table before me. Then she went away, leading the suspense to build up even more. And after a few minutes, she came back with a gigantic book, and she placed that book even more reverently on the red cloths, and she opened it to the Iliad, Venetus A. Well, I gazed on it as I had promised my classmate that I would, and we had seen a reproduction on the internet, and the book, the actual book the manuscript was much clearer than the reproductions we saw on the web. it was actually readable if you knew what you were reading. I don't think I could have read it if I didn't already know the opening lines of the Iliad. I asked if I could photograph the page. They wouldn't let me do that because it's on the website and they don't want any competitions like the postcard sellers. But they did let me photograph the book sitting on the red cloths open to Venetus A. So here is the picture of the sacred manuscript, the 10th century Venetus A, open to the beginning of the Iliad. I felt as though I had been to a sanctification. Menina editha peleia jo akeleos, ulomanein he muri akaios algeatheke, polas diphimus psukas aidi proiapsen heroon, autus de hiloria tuke kuneset, oio noisite passi, dios deteleator bule, exudeta prota diaste tener sante, atre ideste anaxandron kai dios Achilleus.